Hello silly people and welcome back to the channel. My name is Trey and today we will continue with inking season week 2 of Lore of the Silverhand ink tests. Last week we did this Lore of the Silverhand with Microns and Copic pens with a little bit of whiteout. But for this week's ink test we will be doing this Lore of the Silverhand starting with ink nibs. I have a Quill ink nib and a G pen ink nib, but also rounding off with the hatching with Microns and Copic pens. Also, there will be a bonus. So the bonus this week is a tale of two Lokis done by John Buscema, the artist. I made 2 reproductions, one done with ink nibs and spot blacks with brush. The other is done with Micron and Copic pens, but also with spot blacks done in brush. We have a lot to do, so let's get started. Alright, so last week we did Lore of the Silverhand just using pens. Used Microns and Copics to make all of this, even the darker areas, which I used hatching and cross hatching. And now this week is a new image, and this one will be done using these nibs. These are the pen holder, this is the nibs, this is a Quill, this is a G pen, and then I'm going to be also using some Microns for detail work. And I think that's about it. Just nibs and then pens for details and hatching. So let's get started. Alright, so to start, I think I'm going to use this Quill, and then once I have more or less what I have in shape, then I'll switch to the G pen. I could go vice versa, but that's just how I'm going to go about it today. So you got to dip it in ink, and then got the ink on it, and then we go forward. Now I go from upper left to lower right, so I don't drag my hand through ink. I usually start with the outlines or somewhat of the outlines in this inking process with these nibs, and then let that dry and then go inwards with other various important bits, and then we'll do detailing with the pens and the hatching, cross hatching and all of that. And that is the plan. Of course, I always go with the face, hair and face first, because those are the most important parts of the image. Usually most audience will look at the face. And I start with that, and then we just move forward. And this is Lore of the Silverhand, my Wandering Warrior Conan type that I'm still trying to get a feel of character-wise. So almost every time I draw him a little bit differently. So I'm trying to codify and make a unified vision of his look. So I'm trying different things just to see how I like the look. So he seems to change in every, almost like Conan, pretty much, where he can have like a slightly different look with different artists. But I'm still trying to figure out the way of this character. So currently I'm using this Quill nib within the holder. The holder is the black part. And what I like about using nibs is that it uses hand pressure for darks and lights. So upper parts of things, I usually have a thinner line, and then the undersides of things, usually I have more pressure in the hand, which gives out more ink and makes a thicker line. Now, alternatively, I have this G pen, and the G pen I feel is a little bit slimmer than the Quill. It gives out a slightly thinner line. To me, I'm going based off feel. And yeah, it just feels slightly different to me. A little bit more contoured. If I want to modulate between the thick and thin, both will be slightly thinner than the Quill. That's just me. But I like using this for doing, I alternate between nibs for live, like his flesh, his hair, and then using another pen for the inanimate stuff, I sometimes do that, but usually there isn't really a noticeable difference between them. So it's all based off of feel for me. But one thing I like using this G pen for is this feathered, the wool or ragged curling cloth that he has wrapped around his waist. I like using this G pen for that. And I've been doing some other experiments with doing textures with a nib and other various pens, and I really like how that's turning out, so I'm doing more of that lately. Okay, so yesterday we did the outlines mostly with these two, a Quill and a G pen nib to get the outer lines, and now we're going to do some microns, and we're also going to do some microns for the shading. Like I want the darkness of the pants, much like we did with the last with this. All right, we're going to do the pants and things with the microns, and we're going to just after that bounce between both of them till we get the final look. So let's get started. So one thing I'm learning in the process of this ink test and learning the tools is that pens are really good for noodling and doodling and also texture work. So for his hair, I'm doing a lot of this texture work with this pen because I don't have to dip it and it can really get in there. One of the best things for using the pen is to get these straight lines. It's for me, getting straight lines with the nibs is slightly harder. I haven't quite gotten used to the whole using a ruler and nibs. I usually smear or mess something up, so I find it easier just to use the pens with a ruler to get those nice straight edges. Again, I'm trying to learn the tools before moving forward for other projects. And of course, one of the best uses for the pens are the details, which are best used on the face. Getting in there with a nib, they're sometimes too large and too big for those fine details that I like to get into the face. So I have now pretty much switched to pens mostly for the details of the face. Now, one of the final things and one of the biggest, most important parts of this is I wanted to practice hatching. Cross hatching is where you do two lines going in different directions, but hatching is just a vertical line, and I'm doing that over and over and over again until I get the values right, or right enough for me. Like I can push some things and leave some things lighter, and even worked with scratching things out or adding white out or a white pen. But I really wanted to learn how to control my hand to make these hatching marks and the values that I want. All right, so another day for lore of Silverhand. We're doing it, we started with the ink nibs, Quill, a G pen, and then we moved over to do some of the detailing work with microns, and we're going to continue with that. I think it's going to be rounding this thing off, because I think we've got it into a place where it looks fairly in place. And so we're just going to tighten it up, and maybe this is the last bit. So let's get started. Here I am again, trying to get the values that I want. I want it darker, and that's what I'm practicing with this hatching. And we just go over and over the lines again. And this is a fairly small, tiny brush. I could go thicker, but I don't want to make it too dark too quickly. And so I'm using a smaller sized marker tip or pen tip to get this hatching just right for me. And I really like how it's layering up, and I think I learned a lot from this whole process of doing these hatching marks. And here is the final of Lore Week 2 with inks with nibs for mostly the outlines and the definition of what it looks like. And then we went in with details with Micron pens of various sizes. There's a lot of hatching because I just wanted to experiment with it, and I think I like how it turned out. I think I'm getting a better handle on it. That's what I think I'm doing. This is an example from last week of what we did with just pens. Just pens over here. And this one was a combination, a slight combination, but I like how it turned out. I'll see how I feel about it tomorrow. But yeah, so far I like how this one looks. So that is Lore of the Silver Hand with nibs and microns. So that concludes week 2 of Lore of the Silver Hand, this time done with ink nibs, but also Copic and Micron pens. While last week we did just Copic and Micron pens, and I think I'm starting to get a good flow. I'm starting to understand how you can make value with just a pen using hatching, cross-hatching, and all of that. So that has been a really good experiment. So I have been Trey Hodges. You can find my work at treyhodges.com. Power to all the creators, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and keep shining. Bye. Ooh, that's a good take. Ooh, that's a good take. So this is John Buscema's Loki pens and pen nibs to ink the outlines, and then again spot blacks. But I want to see if there's a noticeable difference. So the pens are first up, and the best thing about the pens is that they are very consistent with the line work. And there isn't much in the way of flexibility and line work, but that is not the pen strength. The pen strength is consistently and ease of use. And that's why I like using the pens in certain situations. And personally, I've noticed that I do a lot more noodling and doodling with a pen. Like doing the fine, intricate details, I feel more comfortable and I do more of them with the pen, as opposed to a nib where I stick mostly to larger areas of inking. But that's just something I've noticed. Then after the line work, we're using a synthetic brush to do some spot blacks. First, I go in on the character to get all the forms and the shadows of the character before then inking broad areas for the backgrounds. This little Thor was particularly fun to ink because he's so tiny, and just had fun just going with the blacks and touching this up. And there wasn't much to it. It's just a large areas of spot blacks, and yeah, it was pretty cool to do. And so that is all of the ink work for this pen version. And now let's move on to the nib version. Now with inking with nibs, I tend to be more methodical, I go at a more slower pace, and I guess I'm a bit, I wouldn't say relaxed, and I wouldn't say tight. I don't know, it's a different feel, and I like the feel of inking with nibs. I have to dip it in the ink to get it on the tip, and then I move the tip over the paper. So there's a little bit of a pause, and it takes a little bit more time because of the dipping. But I tend to, I don't know, it's like a pause between dipping the ink and you're thinking about your next move. And that little pause, I think, makes me think about the art just a touch more. And I think that's a good thing. Or maybe mostly nobody would notice. And I barely notice, but it does, I think, seem to have a slight effect on the final pieces. Also, when inking with a nib, you can control the line weights with the pressure of your hand. For things that are light, fine lines, needs less pressure, when like the other underside of things, I tend to have more pressure. And so I press down just slightly harder. And I think line weights is makes the lines truly alive, which I think adds to the feel of final works when inking with nibs. And again, after the line work is done, then I go in with the spot blacks on the figure first, because I feel that's a great place to start. Once you get the figure done, I feel I have a pretty solid handle on it. And usually the figure is one of the most complex parts. And so getting the spot blacks on the character is a huge accomplishment for me before moving on to the backgrounds. And Tiny Thor spot blacks. After I have done the character of Loki and the backgrounds, and I work from upper left to lower bottom right, so that I'm not dragging my hand through ink, which I have done before. And so I try to keep a process and a system for how I do my inks, and it just helps me with the better flow. And so I have a pattern of way of doing things that I think helps. And that concludes the inking with the nibs. Nib inks for the outlines, spot blacks on the characters, spot blacks for the background, and that is the second example. So that was the tale of two Lokis, done two different ways. This one was, we started with the ink nibs as I inked all the outline, and I can feel it because it kind of sits on top, and it kind of cuts into the paper, which is interesting. I've always found that interesting about nibs. And this one was done more with pens, Microns, Copics, and the backgrounds, the spot blacks, as they say, were done with a brush to get all the bold black in there with a brush. So those were the three techniques used on different ones. And I'm starting to get a feel. I'm starting to feel it now. And I'm trying to figure out what I do and don't like about each thing. Overall, I think I like doing ink work with nibs and then going in afterwards with pens. And I think it's because there's a flow, there are more living lines, I think. This is just my ideas, my circumspection, my thought process on all of this is that there's more living lines with nibs, right? You can vary the line weights, thicker on bottom of objects and whatnot. And I think that makes it feel more alive, but I get more fatigued with this, with nibs. While this, I can go longer, and I usually go more to the details. Like if I see a detail, I'll just make a mark, and that's not always needed, that's not always necessary. So I think this one has more restraint than a pen. This is just me. This is what I'm learning from doing two things two different ways. I like the look of both of them, but I still feel like I like this more. But I like doing the details with the pens. But we're still learning. We are still learning. So we've got one more test to do, doing the same thing. And for that, I will leave that till next week. So that was Tale of Two Lokis, done by John Buscema and reproductions by me. So that wraps up week 2 of the bonus, The Tale of Two Lokis, done by John Buscema with reproductions by me. One with ink nibs and spot blacks, the other with Copic and Micron pens and spot blacks. So I have been Trey Hodges. Power to all the creators, and I'll see you next week. Take care, keep shining.